On April 4th, 1949, in the aftermath of World War II, the North Atlantic Treaty Organization was formed in Brussels, Belgium. Belgium, a country that was partially liberated by the Canadian Army in World War II, and Canada is a big part of NATO. But the future, as NATO as we know it, is very much in doubt with the crazy musings of President Donald Trump of the United States. To talk more about it, as always, Paul Micucci. Paul, how are you?
Hey, Jim. How are you?
Very good. My father, full disclosure, served 33 years in the Royal Canadian Air Force and took part in many NATO exercises during the Cold War in the 60s and 70s, and has been a big part of the military for many countries, not just the Canadian military, since inception.
Mm-hmm. You know, it's interesting, and you know, NATO's on its 77th anniversary. It was April 4th. And on April 4th, Donald Trump came out in disgust and said, you know, that they had failed to unite behind the United States for the opening of the Strait of Hormuz, and that, you know, he would be looking at leaving NATO. And I was like, oh, wow, that's a different approach. He had said that before, but, you know, Marco Rubio, everyone was rallying kind of behind him to say, you know, how dare they not come to our defense? And, you know, a lot of people were like, oh, you know, that's new. And I said, well, it's not new. You know, since Dwight Eisenhower, the U.S. has complained that other nations have not contributed their fair share into NATO. It's been an ongoing, since the inception, you know, saying you got to put your 2% into it. And we've kind of been culprits in Canada, right? For years, for decades, we've underfunded our NATO commitment. And now finally we're stepping up.
Yeah, we're at the 2%.
Yes.
And climbing.
Yeah.
With some major infrastructure work being done, major procurement, and a major upgrade in the people in the military, both in the regular and reserve.
Yeah. Well, and it's important, you know, if you look at, and I'm going to jump over to the U.S. side for a minute and come back to Canada, but you look at the Iran war and what's going on now, and, you know, Trump he's strategically, I think, on his sixth plan. You know,
which is no plan.
Which is no plan, but he's bouncing from plan to plan, right? He starts off and he says, you know, people of Iran, unite, leave your homes and fight in the streets. No one did it.
Well, because they're all going to die.
He bombs their leadership, you know, destroys, you know, the supreme leader and his group. Then he says, okay, people come out and revolt again. They don't come out, right? Still not realizing that there's a infrastructure that's beneath the top commanders. He goes in and he bombs the heck out of it. He says, okay, I've destroyed your Navy. You have no Air Force. Surrender. Not realizing, quite frankly, that to your point, Jim, which you kind of told me on a show a couple of weeks ago, listen, they have tunnel cities in Iran. So they were smart enough to realize that they couldn't have everything on ground. They went underground, right? So
they've got a massive amount of arsenal in the mountains, in the tunnels.
Yeah, which, you know, you were the one who kind of flagged me on. I've been watching shows. I've been reading about it. I'm like, holy cow, like, you know, their enriched uranium is hidden, you know, 4 stories underground. You think about it, you know, they're building iceberg homes now. So, you know,
that's the one where it's deeper. Yes. So it looks like a bungalow, right?
A friend of mine did one, and he called me and said, why don't you pitch in with me on this project? I thought he was nuts, but he did it. And it is 4 stories underground, and it's pretty cool. Yeah. I wouldn't want to live in it, truthfully, but you think about it, if they're building homes and living in those, why couldn't you do it, you know, and build the underground cities? So they do have the underground cities. That hasn't worked. So they bombed the heck out of it. Then he said, okay, right, on this date, we're going to get rid of your energy. We're going to cut off all your power, roads, bridges, all that stuff. We're going to bomb it. You're going to be done. It's the end. He conceded, didn't do that.
The end of civilization, he used the term.
Exactly. Didn't do that. So that plan failed. They said, okay, ceasefire. Let's talk. That lasted, what, 1 day?
Yeah.
Yeah, really, 1 day.
Yeah.
That didn't happen. So now we're kind of back. So where do you go from here? Because now it's pretty hard. I guess you could try to go back. They're talking today, apparently. I guess Iran, which seems to have a lot more leverage now, could come back and say, well, you know, now I want this, this, and this, and I'm not going to get rid of my uranium. I'm not going to do this. I'm not going to do that. He could concede, but then he's lost. So eventually he either has to bring ground troops in, So he's kind of at that point where he's got to bring ground troops into the Strait, Carg Island. He's got to try to secure it, which, as you and I've talked about, the landmass and the rough terrain that you have to actually move through, and you have to encounter when you land on the beaches and when you try to overcome is horrific. It's a hard landmass, right?
And horrific casualties for anyone sent there.
Right. Now, casualties are tough. And I listened to a show the other night. It's a very good show. And there was a professor talking about the perception of casualties for Americans, which is much different than us.
It is.
It is. So it will in essence unite the country. So, the first mass amount of casualties that when they happen, if they do try to go onto the ground and they try to take over the, whether it be Carg Island or the Strait,
yes,
is going to have interesting effects on, he thought 40% of Americans. 40% of the Americans will unite and want to be there because they won't want their people to died for nothing.
Okay, interesting.
Yeah, which is an interesting thought. 60% who are against it will probably always be against it. You might convert some back, but it's kind of the Vietnam syndrome now, right?
It is
for him. So he's going out and he's saying, I need people to help me from other countries under NATO. He's kind of using NATO support. I need people to help me come because I might have to put ground troops on the ground to actually take control, to get the Strait open again, to do all these things. It's a very interesting and terrible conundrum that he's in, right?
But he doesn't understand the inner workings of actually how NATO works. After 9/11, they instituted Article 5. America was attacked.
Right.
The trade towers in the Pentagon was attacked.
Yes.
And Canada and Britain and all those other countries went to Afghanistan and suffered casualties working with the Americans. That is how the whole concept behind NATO was formed.
Right.
But this is not America under attack. This is America doing something and then asking, oh, by the way, you got to help us. Well, wait a sec. That's not how it works.
Right. And I think, it's interesting because not only has he done that with NATO, but he did it with his own Congress, right? You're supposed to go to Congress, ask to go to war, get a war budget, all that stuff. Since Obama, presidents have kind of bypassed that, right? Presidents have now gotten to the point of where they actually, there's a constitutional issue in the U.S. On whether or not you have the power to do it and whether you don't, how you get funding and all that stuff. So, in his case, he did similar to what other presidents done. He just went and asked later and briefed later and did, which is causing a challenge. With NATO, it's different. I agree. And NATO it's very interesting because Article 5, I went back and I thought to myself, what is Article 5? I remember during 9/11. So I started looking through my documents and trying to figure out what Article 5 was. So Article 5 has a process, right? So, and the process is very interesting. So basically, when a member is attacked, the country attacked brings the situation to the North Atlantic Council, to NATO, principal political decision-making body. So they basically come and they bring it to the Council of NATO, the 32 nations, and they say, we've been attacked. They deliberate to see if it qualifies as an armed attack. So there's a process to this.
Absolutely.
Right? It's not just doesn't happen.
And they decide what they can do to help.
Consensus is reached.
Yeah.
So it has to be unanimous.
Right.
So it's the 32 nations have to agree that basically Article 5 applies, and then a single person can block. So this is very interesting. And it's very hard to do. And then each member at that point can then choose how they participate. Right. So, because not all of them are as strong, not all of them have big militaries, not all of them have the same resources.
Or have the stomach to send that many people over to potentially die.
Or politically, politically have the thing. So then it gets formed. You get a military body together. That military body is controlled by the U.S.
Yes.
Right. So once they go to ground, the U.S., and I have it here somewhere, but they refer to it as the Supreme Allied Commander of Europe.
Yeah, SACEUR.
Yeah, SACEUR, which is a U.S. general.
Yep.
Right? So right now, the way this is going and the way this plan is going, there's no one in NATO who has any interest whatsoever in being involved and being led into this by
absolutely not
the U.S. So isn't on the table. It's not happening. So NATO de facto is really disintegrating on its own.
But this is not a NATO issue. This is an America issue. And that's where Trump is really confusing a lot of people in America, Paul, that this is not the trade towers in the Pentagon being attacked and thousands of innocent Americans dying under attack. That's a completely different thing. But he can't seem to differentiate between the two.
Well, I think, again, this is the developer psychology, and I bring this up on a lot of shows. Developers, when you meet a developer, it's always interesting because a developer is only, it's I.
Right.
They're big risk takers. You think about it. I'm going to go build a tower. The tower is going to be 51 stories. You know the number of risks that go into that?
Well, it's got to be millions of them.
It's insane, right? The liability, the structural, the financing risk, the
unions, the
union
workers.
risk, the worker risk, the liability, the personal liability, the financial liability if you don't sell enough units, rent enough units, all that stuff. It's a wacky mindset, right? You have to be a little off-center to do it.
Well, we're seeing that with the condo market in Canada right now.
Right. Yeah, well, exactly, right? But you almost, it almost takes and I'm not trying to be too rough on developers, but you almost have to be a little off-center, a lot off-center, right?
You actually get
you really do. And I don't want to use any bad terms, but you know what I mean? It's a different risk tolerance that a normal person would not be able to absorb.
Well, obviously, they deal with it so often, it doesn't affect them physically and emotionally. Like anyone else in that kind of risk, like, oh, I can't take it. I'm out.
Well, and you know what? It's interesting because in my lifetime, most of the people I've met or had business dealings with that do that for a living usually have some pretty big issues on the side. Let's put it that way. Is that
right?
Yeah, they usually struggle with a lot of things.
Huh.
So it's just because no matter how good you're at it, and no matter how much risk tolerance you have, it does wear on you. And quite frankly, the fact that you could be out of business and bankrupt on the next project and wiped out every single time is hard to manage. Right?
How could it not affect a human being?
It's your family. It's your reputation. Every project is like the first project, and every project has the opportunity to destroy you. So now this is the psyche of the person, talking to us about Article 5 and, how he's getting along with NATO. So when he looks at it, he's looking at, okay, I funded NATO. I have the most military personnel in NATO when we go to a conflict. Article 5 only has ever been called based on an American initiative. So he's kind of looking at it from the I perspective, and he's coming forward and saying, okay, because it happened before, you guys should join me and you should support me in this, because without us, it's going to cause, Iran's going to get a nuclear bomb. They're going to use it on someone, and quite frankly, because there's instability. And that's the rationale he's using. Why, right?
Now, if there was an aircraft carrier in the Persian Gulf not doing anything, and the Americans hadn't bombed Iran,
yes,
there was no war, and the Iranians shot missiles and blew up the aircraft carrier, and 3,000 U.S. sailors died, they need to have a case to go to Brussels, Belgium, to NATO and said, look, we had an aircraft carrier not doing anything. Look what they did. They attacked us. That's different.
It is different, but and the Article 4, which usually leads to 5, which is a consultation, it's been enacted a few times, right? The Syrian-Turkish conflict, the conflict in Turkey before. There's been a few.
In Cyprus, right?
In Cyprus, yes. I think it's been 5 or 6 times. It's been in Poland and Russia, Estonia. It's been invoked with the Russians. So Article 4 has. He kind of bypassed all that, right? So he didn't do any, just like his Congress, he didn't do any pre-briefings. He didn't go to NATO and do any consultation. He just went straight into it, right? And that was always the Israeli, conversation with the prime minister and the president, Netanyahu, when they started. The fact that he called him up and said that he was going to, eliminate the supreme leader and everything else. I got into a whole terrible sequence at the beginning of how it started because it wasn't communicated clearly how they were going to enter into this war.
Yes.
So it got off on the wrong foot communication wise, and then not going to NATO. But now it really has disintegrated on its on its own, right? It's actually made its way to where NATO, because it's supposed to be an alliance, is disintegrating. And Trump doesn't have to leave. He doesn't have to say goodbye to NATO. He can just say, I'm not going to fund it as much. I'm not going to participate in much. He has the ability not to participate on any level anymore.
I still think NATO lives even after all of this, Paul, but maybe in a different form. Maybe it evolves into something different than we had known it.
Okay.
And Germany right now is going through their biggest military spending, quite frankly, since World War II.
Oh, yeah.
Poland has already beefed up their military. France, all these countries in the Scandinavia are doing the same thing. So, and Canada's going through their expansion with the military. So the NATO alliance, even if the U.S. takes back and has a junior partnership in it, they'll say, look, we'll still support each other, and we'll do our best on our own. Now, whether or not it's successful, I'm not sure. But I think NATO as the concept, because of the ill will towards Trump and America, it will stand up. It will stay. It'll be there. But they'll be like, we'll just do it on our own.
Yeah. Yeah. And I really think, when he says he's going to leave NATO, I think that's a bluff. I don't think he has to leave NATO. I think all he has to do, quite frankly, is go quiet. And NATO, to your point, will have to restructure to adapt without them. That means significant, where the prime minister is going right now. I think he foresaw this. I think he knew at some point this was going to happen. And, he's making some bold moves to get our spending for military up, which I think is really important. And, it's interesting because I mentioned on another show, I was at a job fair. We're doing a show on this job fair. And right across was the Canadian Army and the Navy.
Recruiting setup?
Recruiting setup across from where we were situated in the job fair. And it was busy. Right. Like really busy. There were about 2,000 people came through in about 3 hours. I have to say half of the people that came through were filling out a information sheet to get more information on joining the military in Canada. And to tell you the truth, I was happy.
Well,
I was happy because most of the people that came through this job fair, which I'm going to talk about in another show, were really disconnected from society. You could tell that they were showing up to the job fair without a tie, without a suit, without resumes, not doing research on. They were really lost individuals who had unfortunately got to a point in life where, they just need some discipline and some support to get them back into play, to understand the nuances of how to deal in business and in life.
Well, and Mark Carney, to his credit, and David McGuinty is Minister of National Defense now, with their changes, once these young people at the job fair, if they get into the Navy or the Army and they go through boot camp and they're an entry-level private position, it's $52,000 a year with benefits and food. And, right now they're like, where else am I going to get that? And to your point, they're going to learn decorum and respect and proper etiquette and discipline, along with the trade they're going to learn for a few years and have some money in the bank when they leave.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting, Jim, because, we're talking about spending upwards of 5% of our GDP on military, right? So a substantial increase, which equates to about $118 billion.
It's staggering money.
It is staggering money. But that really will cause us, if you look at 20% of that going towards personnel, because you need people. You can't fly anything, you can't dig anything, you can't operate any machine or whatever without people in some shape or form. Right. Whether it's a joystick or whatever. Yeah. But you do need people. So that translates into about 300,000 people. So, in Canada right now, we're about 70,000 full-time in the military, 30,000 reserves. We're about 100,000 strong, give or take. Yes, correct. It's changing, it's growing, which is good. We've done other shows on it. So you need about, triple the number of people you have now. The U.S. now, which is very interesting, which has the same conundrum. They're a lot bigger, like 1 million people with consultants and reserves and regular time. So they have a big body in the U.S., lot bigger nation, 10 times ours. So they have way more people. They're actually starting to do their draft sign-up database.
That's right. All men 18 to 24, correct?
Yeah. So what they're doing is before they didn't keep track of where all men 18 and up were.
Yeah.
Now you're actually getting automatically submitted into a database, your zip code and where you're located and where you live. And so all that data is being compiled. And they're doing that now. They just passed the legislation under the big bill that Trump did. And they're actually starting to compile that. So by the time they get to the midterms in November, they'll have basically have that full database, and they're outwardly calling it the draft database.
Right.
Right. And it's interesting, there's many articles coming out in the U.S. right now about the redeployment of criminals into the military,
which is something they did in World War II. And
Vietnam.
The fictional movie Dirty Dozen, but that did happen where you would go to court and the judge would tell you, you can do this much time in jail or you can go to the Marines or the Army. And the Canadian Army did the same thing in World War II as well.
Right. Well, and the U.S. are starting to actually seriously look at it again to increase their numbers because they know they got to get this issue they're having right now in Iran, not having enough people, not being able to get ground troops to go. That's a challenge, right? So they're trying to figure that out. They're looking at it.
I think it's a big mistake because they had the draft until 1973 and Nixon got rid of it because it was so unpopular.
Yes.
People were rioting on the campuses of America.
Remember? Yeah.
In Kent State and shooting, co-eds and
Forrest Gump.
Right. Forrest Gump.
Yeah.
And so they went to an all volunteer military. In Canada, historically, has been you volunteer.
Yeah.
You join the branch of the military. You're not drafted into it. Yeah. And I think I don't think that would ever fly in Canada, forcing people to join the military. And I don't think that's even on the table. No one's even thought about that. But that shows you how desperate America must be for the military because they often say, Paul, all their branches, they're short-staffed in every branch, Navy, Air Force, Army, and Marines. They're short people.
It's interesting. So I'm at this job fair. So and we might not be forcing it directly.
Right.
But are we forcing it indirectly? So, and this is the interesting thing, right? So sometimes, you don't have to come out and say you're doing a draft, but you can create a draft because, when I'm standing there and I'm looking at all these young kids, not all of them are young either. Some of them were older gentlemen who were over there signing up. I watched one girl sign up. They all cheered. She actually signed up to go.
Nice. Oh, nice. That's great.
Yeah, and everyone was cheering. It was a nice moment. Yeah. She was there for an hour and she finally, made her decision and, submitted her app and everything. And everyone was cheering and they were doing a big thing. And I thought to myself, wow, that's really cool, that she's doing it. But, I'm looking at these kids and I'm looking at these young people, new immigrants, Canadians, all kind of mulling around. And I'm thinking to myself, they probably don't have a spot. Like they probably don't have a spot in the workforce. And, and because I'm
outside of the military,
I'm talking to them and I'm looking at them and I'm thinking, what other option? And, when I lived in the U.S., I saw this. Like I saw a lot of this. Like I saw a lot of very poor urban cities where I'd be going through the airport and I'd meet these young, mostly Hispanic and African-American guys. And I'd always buy them a beer.
Yeah.
So when I was sitting waiting for the plane, I'd say, hey, come have a beer with me. And I'd buy them all drinks, at the bar by the gate. And I'd just talk to them, and I'm like, you guys are shipping, where are you shipping out to? And, they tell me stories about where they came from. And they all came from like the inner city Chicago. They came from farms in North Dakota. They came from these places. And I think to myself, wow, like but they see it as a future. Like
my dad in the 1950s, high school dropout, immigrant family, lower middle class to working class. He had very little options but to join the military.
Well, it's funny. So I'm sitting there and I'm watching these kids and guess who they look like?
I don't know.
They look like those kids in the airport now. So I'm sitting there and I'm thinking, wow, I'm seeing this again.
At the recruiting fair.
At the recruiting fair. So I'm watching these kids over, across from us, doing the thing. And one of the young ladies who was there with us, and she's not that young, but I always call her young. She works.
They're young to us.
She works with us in another company, and she has a son, and he's graduated college, and
nice.
He's been kicking around, but he's been struggling. Right? His path has been kind of wayward. and he hasn't found where he's going. She says to me quietly, she says, my Stephen, my son, signed up. I said, good for him.
It's a great idea.
Good for him. And I said, so I brought the instructor or the recruiter that was over there at the end of the day as we were wrapping up. Hey, I said, you know what? I'll buy you coffee. Go have a coffee with her. And he said, what do you mean? He said, go sit with her for a few minutes. I said, talk to her. Right? Because she has all these questions about where her son's going and what he's going to do. And she's worried and everything else. And he's telling her, he wants to be this and he wants to do this and he wants to be this in the military. She needs someone who can kind of give her some advice.
Smart.
And start to talk to her. And she came back and said, oh, thank you for that. And I said, well, I'd be asking this. If it was my son, I'd be asking all the questions you were asking me a few minutes ago. But I never served. So quite frankly, I know no answers.
So I spoke to Brian Ested yesterday. We did a show. And he said, people forget, because of the movies, they have this misconception that you join the military, go to boot camp, and everyone's like on the tip of the spear, as he said. But it's not true. It's only a small percentage. There are people that learn how to do HVAC because that's needed for buildings.
Yeah.
Or they learn how to be a cook, or they're learning welding and carpentry. And like there's all these trades that are necessary to support those people at the front line.
Right. What did you tell me once? For every frontline person, there's 6 to 10 people supporting them behind the scenes.
Yeah. My dad was ground crew. He fixed the engines on the aircraft. So he had a team of mechanics to fix the equipment, the instruments, the engines, and everything before the plane could take off.
Yeah, exactly. So, you look at it now and you say whether it's direct or indirect, but quite frankly, we're kind of coming to that point where whatever is going to happen, and this is the key moment, where you look at NATO and you look at where we're going. Also, you look at us building a military and how we're going to build a military with those people. And are they seeing, the interesting part is I think what the government's seeing is they're seeing not only the need for a military, but that Canada needs the military. So
and that's a great way to put it.
Both ways.
And then in Carney, to his credit, this is the economist in him. This is where his years of experience realizes, there's a need here in the workforce. There's youth unemployment. We have a need to increase the size of the military. They'll make money.
Yes.
So this is a perfect marriage of the two.
And in 15 years from now, they'll all be pensioned and they'll have trades and they'll be out and running. I know it was kind of, I felt it a little bit, and I understand why they're doing it this week. This week, they actually switched the age. They increased the age of WSB and a few benefit programs in Ontario to 65 and over.
Oh, so they did?
Yeah.
Oh.
The trades, and the reason they did is because trades were being cut off at 65, and so they were retiring because they couldn't get some benefits to stay going. I understand why they're doing it. It is a little discouraging because you would hope that there was a succession plan for trades that was building, and it hasn't, right?
So they need the older people to keep doing these trades.
Oh yeah, they want people 65 and up to keep working because they don't have replacement trades, which I can tell you that's true.
Wow.
That's 100% true. So, these are just some of the issues we're encountering. The military will be a quick way for them to get to those trades, get trained up, learn where they can make mistakes. Where a guy who's building homes won't tolerate, but they'll tolerate it in the military because they're going to try to get to that guy or gal to a new place. Another thing I saw, which, and I'll just be short on it.
No, please, Paul.
I saw a lot more ladies.
Absolutely.
A lot more ladies at the desk. So at the recruitment desk, there were a lot more ladies. I mentioned a young lady signed up. They were there and they were trying to get involved and they saw their role in the Canadian Armed Forces, which was nice.
The military and the government, to their credit, they've done a good job on Instagram and social media. And I've noticed a real trend that they're showing women in different roles within the military in all branches, flying C-130 Hercules, commanding Navy ships, running a military Army data center with computer banks. So now these women, the young women who are on social media, because that's what happens, are seeing images of real women in the Canadian military doing real things and thinking, I could do that too.
Yeah. Yeah, no, and I saw it, right? A live example just there in the number. And I was shocked because they would go around and then they'd end up, every one of their last visits for their job fair that I was at was over at those two booths. And so they're paying attention, they're learning.
Yes.
They learn differently than us.
Yeah, they
which
do.
is interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah, they definitely, they're learning differently. They're learning on their phone, like you said, through social. But you know what? NATO is being part of NATO. So as NATO shifts and the Canadian military builds, and the U.S. probably doesn't see it as a benefit anymore. So, like Trump says, as long as Trump is in, now maybe when Trump's out, the new president will start to form a faction. But all these things have lasting impacts, right? So all the dissension and the challenges that other countries are having with what's going on right now, and splintering in the coalitions and alliances that originally came with NATO. If those all, disintegrate and they're reformed, they'll reform differently. And that's where Canada has to figure out where they fit in that new, what did you call it? The new
sort of a new NATO light
format.
Because think about this, the U.S. election in 2028, by the time, say, whoever is president and they get sworn in January 2029, we have no idea the state of the American economy. They may not be financially able to put in the amount of resources and money into NATO what they did before. Because once it's pulled back, it's harder to put it back in.
Yeah. Well, it goes somewhere else, right?
It will go somewhere else.
And he's trying to actually increase his own military budget substantially. So he keeps trying to drive that up. So if he diverts it and, all those people are hired and the machines are being built and the procurement's already happened, a really interesting time for us. And as we talked about the midterms. So,
and we're just a few months away from that.
November is the midterms, right? November 3rd. And for most Canadians, we don't pay attention to it. I know sometimes I forget about it and I live there.
And then you wait the next day and go, oh, this happened.
Yeah. 435 seats in the House of Representatives are up for vote.
Is that right?
Yeah.
Oh.
Right. 35 of 100 seats in the U.S. Senate.
That's big.
Yeah. So this is a big outcome. So whatever comes out. Now, he's looking at that and he's saying, I got to get everything I need to get done. So this is like this push over the summer. Again, we learned this over Christmas. Remember over Christmas? What was the one thing over Christmas? We all went to Christmas and we thought, he's not going to go into Venezuela. Right?
Oh, Trumpy.
Yeah. Remember?
Yeah.
They worked all through Christmas, and they were trying to go into Venezuela on Christmas Eve, but the winds were too high.
Yeah.
And he had to pull out, to go in and get the president.
Yeah, it was unsafe to try the mission.
It was unsafe.
Yeah.
So the only reason they deferred and went. So then, a few weeks later, they were into Venezuela. We're going to go into the summer. He's got the midterms coming up. Trust me, whatever he's going to do with NATO, not do with NATO, figure out to go quiet with NATO, whatever he's going to do in Iran, he's going to do in this summer. He is onto it.
If he doesn't, the current Republicans in Congress, in the Senate, they're toast.
Yeah.
The Democrats will have the hammer and everything.
Exactly.
Americans are so pissed off at Trump and what's going on. His approval rating is at record lows right now.
Well, think about the pressure to get in, resolve Iran, get out, do the hero's walk, go back, get people to get supportive of him again, figure out his domestic economy and domestic issues, and get back into a midterm where all those people that I just mentioned are going up for election.
Paul, he can't even go through the weekend without creating an AI image of him as Jesus healing people. How do you expect he's going to go all the way to November without screwing up? If I'm a Republican congressperson or senator, I'm like, there's no way he's not going to blow it for me between now and November 3rd.
Right. But that, back to our NATO discussion, that always speaks to me that the fact that NATO for the time being is, you just ice it because quite frankly, he's not interested. He's kind of put it in the rearview mirror now. He said, they're not helpful. I'm not worried about it. He's off. And that, having spent time with Americans, spent time with developers, he's already on plan B or plan C, D, E, F, G. He's already somewhere down the alphabet. And quite frankly, he's off to the next thing. NATO is so far in his rearview mirror right now. They've parked it.
Right.
And
I agree.
So reliance on NATO for any shape or form, not of interest to him. And quite frankly, therefore, NATO over the summer or into the fall is probably a big discussion for Canada.
Yeah, look, Paul, I'm under no illusions that all the top leaders of the remaining NATO countries and the generals have had private conversations that, look, if something happens, if something kicks off, in this country or that country will be there for you, but we have to go into it realizing America might be not there for us. And I'm sure they've had those conversations and they have those contingency plans already in place, Paul.
I agree, Jim.
Yeah, see, that's why we listen. He's got all the answers.
Thanks.